Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to nuclear physics. And today's lectures, we will talk about the Linac. I'm Dr. Pervez Ahmed. So let's start with our lectures on Linac. So what is a Linac? Linac is basically a particle accelerator which accelerates the charged particles. So what are the charged particles which can be accelerated in the Linac? So the charged particle which can be accelerated in the Linac are basically electrons, protons, or heavy ions. And these particles or ions, they can be accelerated in a straight line. So how actually the things happen in the Linux? So all the process that happen in Linux Linux accelerator is basically self explanatory, and animation shown at the top of this slide. So let me describe the process and different points. That is for at first we have a source of the charged particles, and so the charged particle from this particular source enters on the left and are accelerated towards the first depth tube by an electric field. Here you can see that we have a source of the charged particle. When the charged particle is being emitted, so it's accelerated toward a depth tube at the left. So enter on the left and accelerated toward the first depth tube. Here from is accelerated toward the first depth tube. Accelerated by what? Accelerated by the electric field. Here you can see that the arrow is basically showing the electric field. So what happened after that? After that, once inside the depth tube, here when the particle is emitted from the source and it's accelerated toward the first depth tube. So once inside the depth tube, they are shielded from the field and drive through at a constant velocity. Once the particles from here, from the source, enter the depth tube, so then it's move with the constant velocity. So after that, you can visualize. The way we are describing the thing, at the same time you can visualize the thing by yourself. So when they arrive at the next gap, here you can see that when the particle, after being passing from the one depth tube, and it arrived at the next gap, so the field, here you can see that the field accelerate them again. From here, when it started from the first, you see here, right after the emission from the source, it was accelerated by the electric field until it's entered the first step tube. Then when it's arrived at the gaps, again it's been accelerated by the electric field. So when they arrive at the next in the next gap, the field accelerate them until again they reach the next depth tube. So you can see it here. The process, this process is continuous with the particle picking up more and more energy and each gap. Here you can see that. You can observe the energy, the kinetic energy of the particle is the star, and when it passes to the first step tube until it reaches the gap, the first gap, then the second gap, and then the third gap, you can visualize, you can observe the process. We said that the process continues, the particles picking up more and more energy in each gap until they shoot out of the accelerator on the right. Here you can see that. You can observe the kinetic energy of the particle. Right at its first generation from the source, it was emitting from the source, and then when it's by emission from the first step tube, then second tube, and then last, when it's getting out from the all depth tube. So you can observe the kinetic energy at the speed at which the particle is being emitted. So at the end, we're saying that they are being shoot out of the accelerator on the right. So why we the question here is that why we are utilizing the depth tube, or what is the function of these depth tubes. So the depth tubes, they are necessary because an alternating field is used, and without them the field will alternately accelerate and decelerate the particles. These depth tubes, they are being necessary, they weren't there, so the alternative field might have been accelerating the particle, accelerating and decelerating would have been possible. Here you can see that we are only accelerating the particle, so we were avoiding the decelerating effect of the alternating field. So that these steps are necessary. If they weren't there, so the particle, the decelerating of the particle is also possible. So in order to avoid those decelerating effect, we are utilizing the draft tube. So the draft tube shield, which in other words we can say that the draft tube shields the particles for the length of time that the field would be decelerating. I mean, when the field is decelerating, so these draft tube is basically shield the particles from that effect. So this is how the Linux work. That is how we accelerate the particle and Linux accelerator. So that's all for the Linux accelerator. See you in the next lecture.